Hi, I'm Meredith Bell, President of Performance Support Systems, and I am here today with one of my favorite authors and people in the world, Mark Goulston, and another one of my favorite people, Denny Coates, who's been my business partner for more than 27 years. Welcome, Mark and Denny.
It's good to be here.
And the reason for our call today is I recently read an article called Power Causes Brain Damage in The Atlantic. This is back in, I want to say, August of 2017. And when I read it, I immediately thought of Mark and Denny because of their interest in the brain, and Mark in particular, his interest in listening and understanding the dynamics in connecting with and relating to people. And when I shared it with them, they both loved it. And Mark wrote back and said, oh, we need to have a discussion because he really gained some important insights. I guess you'd say you connected some dots. And so we want to pursue those today in this conversation, which I think will be very useful and helpful for the folks listening to this call. So Mark, tell us a little bit about what that article caused you to think about.
Well, it explains my brain damage that's going on. I thought it was something else, and I'm just on a power trip. That's what's doing it to me, is my power trip. My, egos can be dangerous to your mental energy, but actually, in reality, it was an amazing article, and it really was helpful to me because for most of my career, probably for 25 years, I was a therapist and I was a suicide specialist. And my main, almost exclusive tool was empathy. And anyone who's read my book, Just Listen, knows that I'm a big fan and proponent of helping other people to feel felt, which is different than feeling understood. So feeling understood is often an intellectual thing, but feeling felt causes people to feel less alone. And when you can listen to people so they feel felt, oxytocin is flowing in both directions. And oxytocin is actually the antidote to cortisol. Mm-hmm. So a lot of people don't know that when your stress is high, your cortisol is high. And one of the reasons that women live longer than men, other than the fact that, men have had it sooner than women, they just want an early exit. But all kidding aside, is that men, when they get stressed out, their cortisol goes up, but they pull away and they hide away because they feel vulnerable, they feel exposed. And then they come up with a way to master the stress, and they come back and they take the hill. And if it works, that's fine. But their cortisol level stays high all the way through. And so as does their blood pressure, potential for strokes, heart attacks. Whereas women know, at least from the feminine energy, is that when they can talk and feel felt, their oxytocin goes up. And so when oxytocin goes up, cortisol goes down. And there's something in our emotional brain called the amygdala, which when it gets kind of overactivated can hijack us away from being able to think rationally. But when oxytocin goes up and cortisol goes down, the amygdala goes back into the holster. And when you can do that and help someone who works more on emotional energy to feel felt, they calm down and they come up with their own solutions. And so for many years, I was this empath, and I was bathing the people I saw in oxytocin, helping them feel less alone. And when they felt less alone, they'd cry, they'd feel hopeful, and their suicidality would become less. But what's happened is over the years, I've found ways. The challenge for me has always been how do I make this scalable? Because basically it depended on me. And after 25 years of doing it, I was kind of empathed out. It didn't depress me, but just the sadness was just huge. And so I then expanded out into the business world, and I like helping people become more successful and effective, but it really wasn't my calling. When you can have conversations and people get to where they want to live, that's a higher calling for me, but I just couldn't do it one-on-one anymore. So what's happened is I've developed a protocol and ways in which I can coach and teach other people to be empathic. In fact, as you both know, Meredith and Denny, I spoke in Russia last year to managers from the Russian Federation, and it went over so well, they did a 3-minute highlight reel, and essentially I talked with the audience for 6 hours. And when you talk with the people, there's so many people in the world that live lives of without closeness, without connection to themselves. And when you can give them the experience of with, people just lean into it. They're starved for it. And with is synonymous with oxytocin. But what's happened is the more that I see a way to scale this, where it can be one to many, it's kind of exciting. And I feel a sense of power and excitement and momentum. And I'm glad that I mentor many people, and I'd say at least 60% of the mentoring is empathy and 40% is helping them fulfill their potential in the world. But I think they seem to appreciate the mentoring because they feel talked with, as opposed to just focused on what are you doing today. But I do have this internal conflict, because when I'm feeling powerful, I feel excited. I'm sure what's happened is my adrenaline is flowing through me, and an adrenaline rush makes oxytocin look like, a weak kid sister. And so that's my conflict, because when I'm really present and focused in looking and listening into people's eyes and listening into their hurt, fear, anger, pain, guilt, shame, and they feel me listening into their eyes with no other purpose than to alleviate those. I'm not there to sell them anything. People lean into it. And people start to cry. And I sometimes start to tear up. And so that's a different kind of that's the kind of hot sink that the world needs.
Yeah.
And when they lean into it, I can just even feel it. I can feel they're feeling hopeful as they feel less alone. But this other stuff is really heady. I mean, it is neat to be on a roll. So that article especially hit me. And in terms of power causing brain damage, if you think power is somewhat related to adrenaline, and adrenaline is somewhat related to Adderall and stimulants. I mean, adrenaline is like your natural cocaine. And you can understand how if you're only running on internal stimulants, that you're going to burn out your brain. I mean, in the same way as people who are addicted to speed and cocaine, they burn out their brain. So I found it really fascinating.
Denny, do you want to comment on, a key point that you got from the article, and also tie in with what Mark's just been talking about?
To me, when I first looked at the article, I took it as a metaphor, brain damage. Basically saying, well, there's something going on in your head. It's not good. But is there really brain damage, you see? And you talked about, well, I know that when people are really in a competitive situation, there's this aggressive mindset, that adrenaline does kick in. It's part of our nature. And so does cortisol flowing into the bloodstream. What I know about cortisol is that from ancient times, when that was a part of our survival, we needed that adrenaline, we needed that cortisol. But you get the kill and you carry it home. Well, the kill only lasts 20 or 30 minutes, and now you're busy carrying it home. Okay, that gives the adrenaline plenty of. I mean, it doesn't take long for adrenaline to subside, but cortisol is different. It goes away, but more slowly. Mm-hmm. But it does. It goes away. And so the caveman, he didn't have a problem with adrenaline or cortisol. It's fine. No brain damage. But I've been concerned in my book and in my work about kids who play violent video games. You'd be astonished. Maybe not. Maybe you know as much about it as I'm learning. But video games, there are thousands of them. And there are genres. I checked how many, there's probably 24 genres of video games. It's such a huge business that it dwarfs the movie industry by a lot. So therefore, like the tobacco industry, the profit potential there is huge. And the guys at the top are figuring, okay, let's get them addicted to this because they'll keep on playing. They'll love it. And when we get version 4 out, they'll buy it. They'll tell their friends, we'll score. They don't care if it's addictive or not. In fact, they do care. They want it to be addictive. It's designed to be addictive. Each new version is designed to be more addictive. I don't want to get onto a rant here, but when a kid plays one of these first-person shooter games, last time I checked, the top shooter games are 50 of them. Oh my God. I mean, it's such a thing. The kids love them. They, when you see the screen, basically you see the back end of a weapon firing away and killing people, okay? And it's the thing about the brain that I understand is that it reacts to the environment. So if you really are holding an M16 and you really are in combat, you need that adrenaline, you need that cortisol, or you're going to die. And so the brain's taking care of you. A video game has nearly the same impact, if not the same. The brain doesn't care if it's a screen or the real world in front of you. It doesn't. It just reacts to it. And that's why kids get excited. It's wow, and they're into it and they're keyed up. Okay, so there's adrenaline and there's cortisol. 2 hours later, maybe they need a drink or go to the bathroom or something, and the adrenaline dies off, but the cortisol doesn't. They go right back to the video game. It's unrelieved stress. Now, what I know about the cortisol, what I've read in the research is that it gets into brain cells, particularly in the hippocampus, which is the part that coordinates short-term learning into long-term memory. And also the prefrontal cortex, which I call the smart part of the brain. But it gets into the cells, and when it stays there, if it stays there, it can cause the cell membrane to deteriorate and kill the cell. So guess what? It's not a metaphor, man. Unrelieved stress, all that cortisol in your brain, it will kill the brain cells. It will. And it'll affect your ability to take in new learning. It'll affect your judgment. It's a serious thing. It's something that I assume almost nobody knows about. And I was very interested in your situation, Mark, because I used to be in the Army, and so I hung out with generals a lot, was on high-level staffs and all this, and so I'm familiar with men who have a lot of power. And yeah, man, they're different. Some of these guys I knew when they were majors, and to see them as 2-star generals was like a really different experience. They acted differently, and so they had this power, and so they had changed. And so I can affirm that for you. Now, in your situation, you didn't become a general. You became a successful author. And so instead of treating people one-to-one, you had this ability to scale up a little bit and become a speaker and an advocate and working at a higher level, affecting many more people. Very possibly, there was this rush that you talk about is similar to, it takes you away from that one-on-one. It's not the same as that one-on-one. I know that these friends of mine who became generals, when they were young officers, they had to exercise some empathy with the soldiers around them. If they didn't, the soldiers, well, they wouldn't follow, because you weren't really taking care of them. You didn't really sense what they needed. You weren't their brother. They would feel that and know that, and they wouldn't follow you. So the more you were empathetic towards the soldiers around you, the better you took care of them, the more they would follow you, and you get the job done, and you can become a first lieutenant, okay, or a captain or something like that. Well, generals don't interact as much with soldiers as they used to, and they have a very different perspective. It's a strategic perspective. It's this organization, it's sort of an abstract concept that they're commanding. And they're not leading soldiers anymore. They're commanding this abstract organization. And it's not an activity that involves much. Now, they do interact with their staff, but my observation is that they don't interact very much with their staff, and they interact differently. I don't have this experience of corporate power, but I sense that part of it is they're thinking more about themselves, and they're thinking more about the profit of the organization than they are about compassion or the impact of what they're doing on human lives. And so it's hard. I mean, that's a challenge. It's maybe they need to think seriously about, but most of them don't, I don't believe.
Well, one of the things from the article that, just really struck me so much, Denny, that tied back into what Mark's written about is this losing the ability to mirror, someone else, and which ties in instantly to me with empathy. But, to even notice when somebody's upset, to notice and relate to some of the emotions that people are feeling. From your experience in the Army, Denny, you're talking about the generals kind of losing that, and I can see where in the corporate world some of these higher level people, the more they move away from the frontline employees and the things they're dealing with, but there's not, it's combined with this thing of having power, being in charge. And I'm just curious, Mark, because you were talking about the empathy and connecting so deeply with one-on-one when you're with people, but yet you have something different going on when you're in this role where you're trying to have a broader impact, the one-to-many. And I'm just curious, you've come to an awareness of the differences that you feel within yourself in these two roles. And I'm curious, how are you, or what are you doing? What are your strategies for maintaining that empathy when you are not in a one-on-one situation, but rather with a group?
Well, it's interesting because I can feel the difference when I'm talking with a group. I hope I don't talk at or over them, because I know what it's like to feel when someone's talking at or over you. But I can tell when it's interesting. I can sense that when I'm talking with people, I'm influencing them. They're fully engaged with me. If I shift over it from influencing to persuading them and convincing, maybe they're still as connected to me as they were before, but inside I feel like I've turned a corner and I've become more of a salesperson, which to me is more about me than about them. So my best self is when I am fully engaged, being of service to what's really important to the other person, whether I benefit from it or not. But I can see when I switch into persuading, it's very self-serving. And I can feel those kinds of shifts. You know, you mentioned something about the Army, Denny. I want to share something. A friend of mine, Peter Samuelson, he's a serial social entrepreneur, and he co-founded the Starlight and Starbright Foundations with Steven Spielberg and General Norman Schwarzkopf. And he was telling me of a conversation he had with General Schwarzkopf, and Peter is a Brit. And Schwarzkopf said to him, do you know what a general is? And Peter said, not really. I mean, you're going to tell me. And he said, when you're a general, you have to take off all your specialty pins. You know, whether you're in infantry or tanks, you have to take them all off because you're a generalist. And you have to be totally tied to the mission. And you can't hide behind your specialty because the mission needs to use whatever the various departments are, however they best serve the mission. And it goes along with what you're saying, that when you become committed to the mission, you often have to pull away from that specialty where you were more intimately involved with your people and whatever the specialty was. And I can see that they're both important. But to get back to what you were saying, Meredith, here's something that I try to do, and to mentor or coach CEOs who are getting intoxicated by that adrenaline. Now, this isn't for all of them. It's not even for many of them. But what I will share with them is some anecdotes of having done house calls to dying patients and their families. And on a few occasions, some of these were very powerful former CEOs. And at the end of the life, a number of them said things like, I think I outsmarted myself. Hmm. And I said, what do you mean? One of them actually was an iconic figure, was beloved in public, had multiple marriages. You know, the difference between their private life and their public life was huge. And he said to me, he said, I'm not sure I've ever done anything important. And I said, you have a hospital named after you. And he looked at me, and he was really well known and loved in public, and he smiled at me. He was kind of weakened, and he said, don't con a con man, especially when he's dying. I've got all the love that money can buy. Mm. That's all it's worth. Mm. But I think, you know, by drinking too much, I may have just outsmarted myself. And so, you know, I learned from those lessons. And so part of, and I share that with, and then another one said to me, everything that I thought was small turned out to be big. And everything that I thought was big turned out to be small in terms of importance. You know, I'm not close to anyone. I'm close to people that I bought off. And maybe, just maybe, I may have screwed things up. So I try to share those with people. But as I say, it's the minority who listens to that, because when you're in the middle of your power and you're not thinking you're going to be dying, you know, you don't think about it. Mm. But for those people who are watching and listening, what I suggest to people, and this is something that I'm trying to do with difficulty because it is so seductive to feel this power, since I guess I was influential in saving lives is probably God's work, but you know, being able to scale it seems more powerful. But what I tell others, and something I'm trying to do, is guard. There's a saying that my manager tells me, and he says, we always guard our calendar. Meaning that when you calendar something, it's your integrity. We had an appointment to record this. We're recording it at a certain time. And so if you can set aside times in your calendar for marital times, family times, but what you have to say to yourself is, I'm going to be fully present when I'm there as a husband or a wife or father or mother. Those roles don't exist with the other without the other person. I can't be a husband unless there's a wife. I can't be a father unless there's a kid. And so in order to be true to those roles, when I calendar them in, I say to myself, you're here for the other person. And I know something, so I can call upon empathy, listening, putting aside any agenda I have. And so that's what I suggest to these CEOs to do. And then I can teach them how to be present. In fact, one of my blogs, which I've been sending out to a number of people recently, and we can send a link to it, it's on Biz Journals, and it's called RUMIA, meaning missing in action. And it's a 10-step algorithm for becoming more present. And it basically, if you follow the 10 steps, whoever you're with will think that you're empathic, even if you don't think you've done anything other than follow these 10 steps. But if you practice,
I can add a link to that below the video when we post that.
Yeah, so it's it's interesting. I'm about to give a talk at a leadership conference, and they wanted me to speak to these young leaders on listening, and I thought, yeah, these are older people bringing me in, and they think listening is great, but these are young leaders. They're not going to care about that. So what I did is I said, well, you can buy them the book, Just Listen, and I'm giving as a handout those 10 steps. But the main talk's going to be called Steve Jobs' 10 Steps to Building an Insanely Great Company. And the segue is true. I'll say I've listened very carefully to entrepreneurs. I've listened to what they do to be successful and what works and what doesn't work. So we'll spend 10 minutes on learning to be a good listener and being present, because that'll help you everywhere in your life. But what you really want is Steve Jobs' secret to be building an insanely great company. So I'm going to segue into that because what they need is to learn how to listen, but what they want is to be Steve Jobs. So it'll be. I'm very excited about it, and so are they.
I guess so. Well, you hit on something, and Denny, you did too, with the examples that you've both given. The whole thing of adrenaline and cortisol, coursing through our veins that really make us different than what we sometimes need to be. And what you just hit on, Mark, in terms of being fully present and putting time on your calendar, another way of talking about that, I think, is having the attitude of how can I be of service?
Totally.
You mentioned earlier the idea of serving, and that really is something I write out every day, is this idea of being able to love and serve profoundly so others appreciate their value. And that to me is a way of keeping it, in the front of my consciousness, what people need and how I can be empathetic to them. Because if you're focusing on serving someone else, you can't also be focused on what am I going to get out of this? It's just a different way of being, it seems to me, an attitude, an approach that you bring to interacting with other people. And I think some of the leaders that we love and admire so much are able to maintain that.
I have to ask you something, Meredith, because maybe you've snowed me since I've known you. I think you have to remind yourself to get something out of it. I've never known you to not be of service. I mean, I think you have to wake up and say, how can I be selfish and self-serving today? I haven't picked that up in you ever.
Well, but I see it as my purpose in life, and I want to remind myself of that every day, because I think that's how we get past this problem about power causing brain damage. Because Denny, the example you gave of these kids using these violent games and the way the cells actually get damaged, and this is what, to me, one of the things this article was pointing at, is there's damage going on in these at the cellular level when people get consumed with the idea of power, and it prevents them from being able to be connected in a meaningful way with the people that, you know, need to look up to them or work with them. And I think that one of our goals in this world that we're living in right now, where people are so, there's so much animosity between people who share different, or not share, who have different positions or different opinions, that if we can, even as we might have a difference of opinion, let that person feel felt, as you say, by helping to connect with them on some level, even if our opinions are different, there's still their value as a human being that we can honor and acknowledge. And I think that is such a key to all of the relationships. So I'm curious, because both of you have been in leadership roles, and just wanting to ask both of you, what are some things that if you were sitting down with a leader who is sort of at risk of becoming consumed with the power he or she has been granted or has taken on, what are some things that you think they could do in terms of the way they think about things, but also the actions they take that will help them stay grounded?
I'd like to tell a little story.
Okay.
I've already alluded to the fact that I used to be in the Army.
Right.
Well, obviously I became disenchanted with generals in general, and in becoming a general, I didn't want to be that. But there was one guy who I thought was the best general I ever met. He's not with us anymore. And I eventually became a personal friend of his. We were in the air defense artillery. The air defense artillery is missiles. In other words, you shoot planes down. His name was Archie Cannon. Cannon. Isn't that something? Artillery, right? Unbelievable. You can't make this stuff up. But Archie, I used to follow along with him while he was doing his work. And his work was to get into a car. This was in Germany. We both worked at the air defense headquarters there. Thousands of soldiers, units all over Germany, with the missiles pointed, ready to knock down a plane that dared come across that border in the Cold War. But so we would go visiting units out in the field on top of a muddy hill, whatever. Archie, all he ever did was go up to soldiers and begin talking to them. That's all he ever did. And he remembered most of their names. It was amazing. To this day, I don't know how he did it. I mean, we would go here, we would go there, we'd get out of the car, he'd go up to somebody, knew his name.
Wow.
Isn't that astonishing? But that's who he was. That's how he exercised his leadership. And to me, as we have this conversation right now, I think that he had mastered it. He was able to be a general and to be empathetic at the same time. Not exactly at the same time, but within the scope of his position. So when he was in the headquarters, you did various general things, and when you get in the car, he was empathetic. And so he had empathy time, so to speak. How do you coach a cortisol addicted top executive? Well, if he cares, maybe he needs more empathy time. It's okay to be a top executive. It's okay to care about the mission, and it's okay to grow the business. It's okay to do all those things that you have to do to innovate and all that, to manage your subordinate managers, do all of that. But you also can get involved in empathy time within the organization and with other people, especially your family, but with any human beings that you may come, if you, let's say you're Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs wasn't this way, but it's just a theoretical example. But what if Steve Jobs decided to get up off of his chair and go out where they're actually doing the work? And he knew the people by name, and he engaged with them and empathized with them of the problems that they're having and the challenges and the frustrations that they're having, so he could offer a little encouragement. And maybe he did some of that. But to do that, as well as to be this daddy rabbit of this large organization, it's okay to be the daddy rabbit, I think. But I think it's more healthy to come off the cortisol and get empathetic also. So maybe that's the coaching. And Mark, maybe that's what you do. Maybe that's how you have your balance, is you spend a fair amount of your life continuing to have one-on-one empathetic interactions with some people. And other times you're standing on the stage. It's okay to stand on the stage. It's okay to sell your book, I think. I mean, what'd you write it for? So you'd hide it? No. You want lots of people to read it because there's some benefit there. It'll benefit them. And you can teach them from the stage because that'll benefit them. It's not empathy per se, but you're giving them some things to think about, and they'll use that in their decision making, and that's cool. So you don't want to feel guilty about that. It may feel different. You call it like a power trip or something. It's different, but I think it's okay, my opinion. And I think it's okay because you do spend a great portion of your life being with people, looking in them in the eyes, and feeling what they feel, which you've done all of your life. And so you know what that feels like. And you would hate to lose that. And so I'm assuming you don't. I'm assuming that you do spend a good deal of time continuing to do that as well. So I don't think you're really in a problem situation, my opinion.
Yeah, no, this conversation has actually been helpful because I think you're helping me realize that that it really isn't a problem. Something I have trouble swallowing, not from you, but my manager says, you know, by not promoting some of the stuff you have out there, you're doing a disservice. I mean, he was very complimentary. He says, you actually have some good value that can change people's lives, and they're not going to know about it. You're going to be like the tree that falls in the forest and nobody hears about it.
Yeah.
And so by not getting it out there, you're actually, first of all, why did you write the thing anyway if you didn't want people to read it? But I think it's, you know, it's a state of evolution and that kind of thing. But I want to circle back to something because you mentioned something about how do you, it's one thing to preach to the choir. It's another thing, how do you get the people who most need what we're talking about and least want it? And how do you affect them? Because too often they're often in leadership positions. And so something that I will do that I find helpful is I try to get very granular with them about what is a picture of success 5 years, 3 years, a year from now. And so I'll try and get them to visualize it's a year from today, and you look back and you say, it's the best year I've ever had, you know, in what I'm doing. So I want you to picture that, and then I will try and get them to picture, what does that look like? And sometimes they'll focus on results. Well, I've gotten these results and such. And it's at that point where I'll say, so what do you think you're doing is going to get you there? What do you think that you're not doing that you need to do to get you there? And Marshall Goldsmith's a good friend. In fact, he wrote the foreword to my book, Talking to Crazy, which just came out in paperback.
I think mine arrived today.
There you go, a couple of days ago. Thank you. And so, but his most famous book is What Got You Here Won't Get You There.
Mm-hmm.
And
Hell, but very good book.
My favorite of his.
Oh, it's a favorite of everyone of his. And basically what he says is being competent, now that's not about power, but being competent, which is not necessarily about empathy, will get you to a certain level. But in order to get results after that, you have to work through people. And if you're offending people, if you're turning them off, if you're triggering in them that they don't want to help you be successful because of how badly you make them feel. And yeah, you can get a short-term result out of fear. But But his whole thing is you might need to change how you interact with people because you're trying to get your results through them. So what I try to do is whoever I'm speaking to who wouldn't want to hear this, I try and lead with a picture of that excellent result for him or her and what they need to do more of. But it's much better if they self-discover, I need to be different with my people, which was my whole purpose. And sometimes they'll say, maybe I need to be different with my people. And I'll look at them in total surprise. And I'll go, really? I never would have thought of that. Tell me more about that. Really? What do you need to do differently? And some of them laugh because they know it's a gotcha, and others I've just snookered the heck out of them and they don't know it.
Well, I think that anyone who's wanting to become more aware of themselves and how they are relating to the people in their lives, I think this conversation can be very useful for them. It'll get them thinking about, especially if they've acquired some kind of power, even if it's as a parent. Denny, you write so much about parents of preteens and teens, but parents have a power also, that when they feel that position, they can lose the empathy because it's well, I told you so, because I said so, you have to do it kind of thing. And so I think no matter what our roles are, whether it's at work or at home, to think about where do we have opportunities to exert power and how can we do it in a way that really is, I don't know if uplifting is the right word, but it certainly enhances the other person and helps to strengthen the relationship as opposed to a dominance kind of position that tends to break down relationships and not build them. Because Mark, circling back to what you said right early on with talking to these executives on their deathbed, I think that is really the whole point of everything. Is at the end of our lives, what will we look back on and remember with regret if we don't make changes? And I think when you talk about getting people to think ahead a year or 3 years or 5 years, I think it was in one of Marshall's books that he talked about thinking ahead to, when you're at the end of your life, and what kinds of things do you want to be known for, and what impact do you want to have made? And it just about always comes down to the people in your life, and have you loved them enough? Have you cared enough? And you can't achieve that result if you're focused on the sort of traditional ideas around power and what that does to the brain. So do either of you have anything else you'd like to add as we wrap up?
I have one thing.
Okay.
Mark, you made, in one of your sentences initially, you mentioned a phrase that I think is the key to it's very important. You said, you've got to be present. And for me, that means really in the moment with the person. In that moment. And that's not our usual mode. We're not that mindful all the time. But if you can achieve that, if you get good at achieving that, and I think most of us aren't, but maybe that's the skill, a key skill in being empathetic is, how do I get myself back to this present moment with this individual right next to me? So I see them for who they are, not as who I hope they are, or who I think they are, or who they might be, or who they've been, but who is this person right now? What is this person experiencing, feeling right now? And you get into that mode, and it's a huge shift away from your usual mindset during a day. Parents have a huge trap. a huge challenge because they are smarter than their kids, way smarter. They are wiser than their kids. They are more powerful than their kids. They have all the money. They have the house, the car, everything. Kids have nothing. And so yeah, they're ignorant and powerless and so forth. And so there's the difference between mom and the kid, dad and the kid. And it's huge. It's real. And a parent can get trapped by that, thinking, well, I'm the dad. I know. This is my house, my rules, et cetera, et cetera. I'm in charge. I'm responsible, all this. And to get from that mindset to this in the moment empathetic mindset is a huge shift. It's very difficult, but it's necessary if you're going to engage with that person, if you're going to love them, really.
So let me convert this, because my skill is often to convert things, I hope, into practical, doable steps. That's one of my signature things. So here is something I hope that will crystallize a lot of what we're talking about, because I've been listening to just your wisdom and your experience, and Denny, and it's just a privilege to know you and what you stand for, what you stand up for. So I'm so glad that we're visiting with each other. A way to crystallize it is, I think I've said it to both of you before, one of my favorite quotes about being present comes from Wilfred Bion. He was a British psychoanalyst, and he talked about listening. And he said, well, I'll convert it. He said, the purest form of being present is to listen without memory or desire. Because when you listen with memory, you have an old personal agenda that you're plugging people into. And when you listen with desire, you have a present or future agenda that you're plugging them into. Mm-hmm. But you're not listening to where they're coming from. Something I wrote about in Just Listen, when I quoted that, is I said, instead of listening with memory or desire, try to become a PAL. And PAL stands for purposeful, agendaless listening. And your purpose is to be of service and to get where they're coming from, what's most important to them, and give them something that helps them get to what's most important to them. And I think the measure of this is if you orient yourself when you're going into a conversation. So the first thing is to say, I'm going to listen without memory and desire. My purpose is to be of service to them. The best way for me to be of service to them is to find out what they really care about and how they're trying to get there. And then how can I assist them in getting there, and ask for nothing in return. And then I've also talked about something I've mentioned from Warren Bennis, which was to be a first-class noticer. And when you notice people, you're less passive than watching and seeing. So I think if you followed what I just suggested and you become a first-class noticer, what you want to notice is that they want to see you again sooner. And I think that's what will happen.
Want to what again sooner?
They'll want to see you again sooner.
Oh, yes.
Whereas I think, so if you've been there of service and you're using everything you have to help them clarify what's most important to them, what they care about, and then help them to get there using any and all resources you have, and then ask for nothing in return, they're going to want more of you. And so what you want to notice, and maybe this is the metric, because I think as soon as you're self-serving, they want less of you.
They'll want more of you because they'll feel understood. Mm-hmm. And if they feel that way, they're not alone. They don't feel alone. They don't feel less. They feel, okay, he's there with me and he understands me. And if they have that feeling, then a lot of the issues that being alone can cause are ameliorated. And I don't want to get too philosophical about it, but the truth is all of us are alone.
Absolutely.
And so it becomes how we become not alone is part of the challenge of living. But we are alone, and it's very difficult to penetrate that. It's very difficult to bring people in or to get closer to people. There's so many variables in a human existence that add up to you're all by yourself. This is you. They don't know these things. They don't know what you're thinking. They don't know what you're feeling. They don't know what your life is like at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. They don't know the argument you had yesterday. They don't know who's bothering you. They don't know 99% of who you are and what you're dealing with. But when a person is able to listen in a way where the person who's being listened to feels understood, really, that's a breakthrough.
Well, I would add to it, and maybe you're using it synonymously. Feeling misunderstood certainly feels like someone doesn't care about you.
Mm-hmm.
But feeling understood doesn't necessarily mean they care about you.
Mm-hmm.
So I would add that they not only feel understood, but they feel cared about.
Yeah.
I'm working with a prison program, and I just spent yesterday all day in a prison, a program called Defy Ventures, which goes in and it teaches prisoners how to think like entrepreneurs. And the recidivism rate is less than 5% for the people who finish this program and they go up. It basically teaches them how to think more clearly, how to plan, how to, be more centered, how to not give into impulses. And what was so uplifting when I went there yesterday, so yesterday was graduation with caps and gowns. It was so inspiring. And 4 months earlier, I had gone there for the previous, volunteer visit where we did business coaching. And what really touched me is as I got there yesterday, I would say a third of the prisoners, when they saw me, they said, "You came back." You came back. I mean, I like, wow. Because some of them haven't had visitors in years. Visitors.
They must have felt by you.
Yeah, felt and cared about. Wow, you came back. You must care. It was so uplifting. It was just, but it's and I think to touch on what you were saying is that I think a lot of people in the world feel alone and lonely, for caring. And so I think we're just mincing words because I know you're a very caring person, but I want to add that because sometimes people can, and I write about in Just Listen, that feeling understood is not the same thing as feeling felt.
Mm-hmm.
And I think feeling understood takes away the frustration of feeling misunderstood, but feeling felt takes away the aloneness and loneliness of just being out there and running out of time.
I hope you're able to work with more executives and help them become mindful with people.
I hope so too.
So that they can click into that mindset of really being there and feeling the empathy towards this person, this unique individual, and teach them how to do that better.
Something I got to thank the two of you because I was about to go down a rabbit hole, and I think you convinced. So I was thinking of a book, and you might say, Mark, that's still a good book to write, but after this conversation, I think it's corrupted by the power part of me. So I was going to write a book called Scaling Empathy. See,
Don't do that, Mark.
But the point is, it's so opposite.
Yes.
But scaling is teaching other people to be empathic in their lives, and as opposed to one-on-one.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I'm not going to do it, but you and I know, with my track record, the publishers would love it.
Yeah.
They say, write that. Well, yeah, but you're not empathic. You just thought it was neat. So I don't know. But
That's a conversation for another day.
I know. I'm not gonna write that. So anyone who's listening who says, "Oh, you can make a lot of money on that," go make money. You can have the book. I'm not gonna write it.
Well, Mark, thank you, and Denny, thank you too for your insights. This has been a great conversation, and I'm looking forward to sharing it with lots of people.
Well, thank you for your purpose, Meredith. I mean, you're an angel. People don't know that. No, you really are.
That's true.
Thank you.
And thank you. It's a privilege to know you, Denny, and I look forward to more of this.
Oh, it's a great dialogue, Mark.
Good.